Moving on to topic 7, the modern workplace, transitions of equality and diversity. At the end of this topic, students should be able to define discrimination and affirmative action. They should be able to also explain affirmative action, understand reverse discrimination and implication of sexual harassment in workplace, and also explain the role of women in workplace. In the modern workplace, diversity meets equality. That is, people from different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, skills are treated equally, irrespective of these differences, to bring about uniformity. When such a process is implemented, organizations come across many hurdles. And so, a clear understanding of these issues and their impact in workplace is required to appreciate the outlook. Any sort of discrimination is highly to be discouraged, especially in a workplace. And for this, many laws have been formulated to bring about equal opportunities. At the same time, what discrimination was done some generations back can be undone through affirmative action, but with certain criticisms. When two genders work together, there are problems like sexual harassment which are bound to happen, and this may create a hostile work environment. And now more women have come to work and are almost on par with men. But in a man's world, this acceptance may also have issues of concern. As an employer, a modern workplace is a complex environment which has to be handled with care. To understand this topic better, certain terms should be defined. What is discrimination? It is simply judging one thing to differ from another on the basis of some criterion. What is prejudice? It is discrimination based on irrelevant grounds. Equal opportunity? It is offering everyone a fair chance at the best positions that society has at its disposal. What is affirmative action? It is the effort to rectify the injustice of the past by special policies. Affirmative action. This term has to have a clear understanding, and it is nothing but a rectification of effects of a past discrimination. Many employers have instituted affirmative action programs designed to achieve a more representative distribution of minorities and women within the firm by giving preference to women and minorities. Affirmative action program, in fact, is now more legally required of all firms that hold a government contract. Arguments in favor of affirmative action. Need for role models. It helps to know that others like us can be successful. We learn and are encouraged to strive for excellence by emulating our heroes and role models. Need for breaking the stereotypes. The knowledge that there are talented African, Asian, Hispanic American and women, and so it does not automatically assign them lesser respect or status. Equal results argument. Some views are that human nature is roughly identical, so that on a fair playing field, the same proportion from every race and gender and ethnic group would attain to the highest position in every area of endeavor. Compensation argument. Compensatory justice implies that people have an obligation to compensate those whom they have intentionally and unjustly wronged. Diversity argument. Living in a pluralistic world makes one get along with those of other races and cultures, so that fully integrated schools and employment situations are definitely expected. There are some arguments against affirmative action. The first argument is that it requires discrimination against a different group, the poor, young, and innocent white males. The second perpetuates the victimization syndrome. It reinforces the spirit of victimization by telling African Americans that they can gain more by emphasizing their suffering, degradation, and helplessness than by discipline and work. This message holds the danger of these people becoming permanently handicapped by a need for special treatment. The third point against affirmative action is it encourages mediocrity and incompetence. This is because firms are forced to hire members of minorities even when far superior candidates were available. The fourth point against affirmative action is unjustly to shift the burden of proof. The employer is placed with the burden of proof if his workplace does not have adequate representation of the underutilized groups. The fifth point is an argument from merit. Traditionally, the highest positions in society should be awarded to those who are best qualified, but now sufficiency rather than excellence is required. Moving on to reverse discrimination. It means hiring or admitting a slightly less well qualified woman or black rather than a slightly more qualified white male for the purpose of helping to eradicate sexual and or racial inequality, or for the purpose of compensating women and blacks for the burdens and injustices they have suffered due to past and ongoing sexism and racism. Unjustified objections. It is equivalent to racism and sexism. Though white males are now discriminated and not given the preference in jobs, it is not for the same reasons that blacks and women were earlier denied their rights. Race and sex are morally attributary and irrelevant characteristics. It aims to help end racial and sexual inequality by women and black role models of minorities. Unjustified stereotyping. Hiring a slightly less well-qualified woman or black is judging the applicant on the basis of their individual characteristics. Failing to hire the most qualified person is unjust. Efficiency and rights have no role to play when compared to qualification. There are certain legitimate objections. Judging on the basis of involuntary characteristics, discriminating between people on the basis of their involuntary characteristics is morally undesirable. Burdening white males without compensation. It is a punishment administered against young white males who are now entering the job markets. Hence, compared to the grave injustice of racial and sexual inequality, the affirmative action and reverse discrimination as objections are easily overweighed and help alleviate for greater injustice. What is sexual harassment in the workplace? It is to bother someone in a sexual way. The harasser offers sexual attention to someone who didn't ask for it and doesn't welcome it. The unwelcome behavior could be anything from touching, spoken words, graphics, gestures, or even looks. The person who decides that a behavior is offensive at the workplace is the recipient himself or herself. Most people make distinctions between how they talk to their best friends, to their children, and to their elderly relatives. Out of respect, they avoid certain behavior in the presence of certain persons. The same distinction must be applied at work. A mistake or an innocent joke can be corrected if there is an apology and no scope of repetition. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission states that every employee has the right to work in an environment free of intimidation, insult, or ridicule based on race, religion, or sex, and women are the victims of a particularly troublesome kind of discrimination that is both overt and coercive. They are subjected to sexual harassment. Although male are also subject to the same instances of sexual harassment, it is women who are by far the most frequent victims. For all its acknowledged frequency, sexual harassment still remains difficult to define and to police and prevent. In 1978, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission published a set of guidelines defining sexual harassment and setting out what, in its view, was prohibited by the law. The guidelines state further that sexual harassment is prohibited and that an employer is responsible for all sexual harassment engaged in by employees, regardless of whether the employer knew or should have known. The harassment was occurring and regardless of whether it was forbidden by the employer. Illegal sexual harassment falls into 4 categories, and the first one is quid pro quo. It means something given in return for something else. In this type of sexual harassment, a supervisor makes unwelcome sexual advances and either states or implies that the victim must submit if she wants to keep her job or receive a raise, promotion, or assigned job. The second one is hostile environment. This is poisoning the victim's work environment by explicit jokes, pin-ups, graffiti, vulgar statements, abusive language, and over-sexual conduct. The third one is the sexual favoritism. In this type of harassment, a supervisor rewards only those employees who submit to sexual demands, and the other employees, those who are denied raises or promotions, can claim that they are penalized by the sexual attention directed at the favored co-workers. The last one is known as harassment by non-employees. An employer can be held responsible for harassment by people outside the company, such as customers, vendors, or contractors, if the employer has control or could have control over their actions. Both law and enforcement system pose formidable obstacles for the victim of harassment. The burden is on the victim to prove both that the harassment took place and that the offender's conduct was unwelcome. Too often, the courtroom inquiry tends to focus on what the offender did, but on how the victim responded. In order to develop or revise an in-house policy on sexual harassment, the policy should incorporate the following elements: employee involvement, written policy, publicity, support from the top management, and its prevention. Lastly, let us look at the women in workplace. The single most important event in the American labor market in the 20th century has been the unprecedented entry of large number of women into the workforce. Women started venturing out for part-time and full-time jobs 60 years back for pin money or out of dire financial need. During the 50s and 60s, women received cultural permission to enter workforce in search of jobs, careers, and new sense of identity. At the turn of the 20th century, only 5 million of the 28 million working Americans were women. In 1984, the Census Bureau reported that for the first time in the history, the prototype of American workers, the adult white male no longer made up the majority of the labor force. The lessons that can be drawn from some of these statistics are: we no longer operate under a gender-based division of labor. The entrance of women into the labor market has changed the composition of the workforce and the workplace, as well as the structure of family life. Women are now demanding the rights to define themselves in the way that men have always defined themselves through their jobs. Glass ceiling may be a mere metaphorical construct, but its ability to impede the professional lives of women is real. It prohibits some women from advancing the corporate ladder and discourages the shop floor staff from equal opportunities for training, advancement, and promotion. It also has limiting effect on the salaries. It should be clear, in view of the future demographic trends, that enlightened self-interest should also prompt business to give women a special hand. The cost of not assisting the coming influx of women with their special needs will not be borne entirely by women. Many businesses aware of these trends have undertaken programs to prepare themselves now to respond to the special needs of women. For example, many companies have instituted daycare services and flexible working hours that allow women with children to care for their children's needs. Thus, to conclude, we see that women have changed, the economy has changed, the workplace has changed, families have changed. Unfortunately, most men have not privately and professionally adopted to these changes. Women who work have higher sense of personal worth and are happier and are more satisfied when compared to women with no jobs. Hence, women are here in the workplace to stay for long in the now male-dominated world. To move on to the next topic, that would be topic 8,